in the glittering underbelly of corporate America, where fortunes rise and fall like the stock market's erratic pulse, one man's cruelty was about to collide with the unyielding force of fate. Imagine this. A sleek high-rise office in downtown Manhattan, buzzing with the hum of ambition and the clink of coffee mugs. But beneath the polished facade lurks a tale so twisted, so deliciously ironic, that it could only be scripted by destiny itself. This is the story of Marcus Hale, a man who thought he could shatter lives without consequence, until the woman he discarded rose from the ashes to claim everything he held dear. Marcus was the epitome of ruthless charm. Tall, impeccably dressed in tailored suits that screamed success, he climbed the ranks at Vanguard Enterprises with predatory grace. As a senior executive in mergers and acquisitions, he reveled in dismantling companies, firing employees without a second thought, and basking in the glow of his corner office. But his true darkness simmered at home, hidden from the world. He had married Elena 5 years ago, drawn to her quiet beauty and the way she adored him despite her blindness, a condition she'd had since birth. Elena was an artist at heart, her world painted in sounds and textures, her fingers dancing over Braille books and sculpting clay into masterpieces that spoke of resilience. At first, Marcus played the devoted husband, but as his career soared, so did his resentment. Elena's disability became an inconvenience, a chain holding him back from the lavish parties and fleeting affairs he craved. It started with words, sharp, cutting remarks about her uselessness. Then came the nights of rage, when a botched deal at work would send him storming home, his fists finding her fragile form in the darkness. Elena endured it all, her love twisted into a desperate hope that he would change. But one stormy evening, after a particularly brutal argument, Marcus crossed the line. He struck her hard enough to leave her crumpled on the floor, blood trickling from her lip. "You're nothing without me," he snarled, packing a bag and slamming the door behind him. He abandoned her that night, filing for divorce the next day and vanishing into a new life with a younger mistress, convinced he'd escaped unscathed. Little did Marcus know, Elena's story was far from over, while he reveled in his freedom. Jetting off to exotic retreats and schmoozing with Vanguard's elite, Elena quietly rebuilt herself. Supported by a network of friends and a fierce determination, she delved into her family's history, a lineage she'd long ignored. Her late grandfather, a reclusive tycoon, had built an empire in the shadows. And in his will, discovered months after his passing, Elena was named the sole heir to a controlling stake in none other than Vanguard Enterprises. The boardroom revelation hit like a thunderclap. Marcus returned from a business trip to whispers in the hallways, executives avoiding his gaze. He shrugged it off at first, striding into the weekly strategy meeting with his usual swagger. But as he settled into a seat, the CEO cleared his throat and announced a bombshell. "Gentlemen, ladies, our majority shareholder has decided to take a more active role. Please welcome Elena Voss, or should I say, Elena Hale." The door swung open, and there she was, Elena, poised and elegant in a crimson power suit, her white cane tapping lightly against the marble floor. A guide dog sat obediently at her side, its eyes fixed on Marcus with an almost knowing glare. The room fell silent as she navigated to the head of the table, her voice steady and commanding, laced with sophistication that belied the pain she'd endured. "Marcus," she said, her tone dripping with poised venom. "It's been a while. I trust you've been keeping my company profitable." His face drained of color, the blood rushing from his cheeks as realization dawned. This wasn't just revenge. It was poetic justice, served cold in the very arena where he thought himself invincible. Elena's inheritance wasn't merely shares. It was leverage, influence, the power to dismantle his world piece by piece. As the meeting progressed, Elena outlined her vision for Vanguard: ethical acquisitions, employee welfare programs, and a zero-tolerance policy for toxicity in leadership. Marcus squirmed in his seat, his mind racing. How had he missed this? Her grandfather's name had been buried in old records, a ghost from her past she'd never mentioned. Now, she held the strings, and he was the puppet. But Elena wasn't done. After the meeting, she requested a private word with him in her new office, the one that used to be his. As the door clicked shut, she leaned against the desk, her unseeing eyes seeming to pierce right through him. "You thought you could break me, Marcus. Throw me away like yesterday's trash. But I've spent these months learning the business, studying every deal you've touched. And let's just say there are irregularities that could ruin you." He stammered, trying to muster his old charm. "Elena, please. We can work this out. I made mistakes, but—" "Mistakes?" she interrupted, her laugh a melodic dagger. "You beat me, abandoned me, left me blind and broken in more ways than one. Now, I see clearer than ever. You'll stay on, for now, but under my watch. Every move scrutinized, every error amplified." Marcus left that office a shadow of himself, the weight of her words crushing his ego. Whispers followed him down the hall. "Did you hear? She's his ex-wife." The power dynamic had flipped, and for first time, he tasted the bitterness of vulnerability. Yet, as days turned to weeks, Marcus plotted in secret. He couldn't let her win. He reached out to shady contacts, digging for dirt on her grandfather's will, anything to challenge her claim. Little did he know, Elena was always one step ahead. Her network of loyalists feeding her information through audio reports and trusted aides. One evening, as he huddled in a dimly lit bar with a forged document in hand, planning his counterattack, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I know what you're doing. Tread carefully or fall." Paranoia set in. Was she watching him? How deep did her influence run? Marcus's nights became sleepless, haunted by visions of Elena's calm face, her blind as a shield that made her untouchable. He began to unravel, snapping at colleagues, botching deals. The once unstoppable executive was crumbling, and the company buzzed with rumors of his impending downfall. Then came the gala, a lavish event celebrating Vanguard's anniversary. Marcus attended, forced to play the part, his mistress on his arm like a trophy he no longer wanted. Elena arrived like a queen, her gown shimmering under the chandeliers, surrounded by admirers who praised her innovative reforms. As the night wore on, she took the stage, her speech captivating the crowd. "Success isn't about domination," she declared. "It's about lifting others up, even when they've tried to bury you." The applause was thunderous, but Marcus seated in the shadows. He approached her later, cornering her in a quiet alcove. "This isn't over. Elena, I'll fight you every step." She turned toward his voice, a serene smile playing on her lips. "Oh, Marcus, it hasn't even begun." Her words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire, curling around Marcus until he could barely breathe. He backed away from the alcove, the orchestra's distant strings mocking him as he fled into the crowd. Faces blurred past, colleagues offering polite nods, investors clapping Elena on the shoulder, everyone orbiting her now as if she were the sun and he a forgotten moon. He snatched a flute of champagne from a passing tray and downed it in one swallow, the bubbles burning his throat. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. The weeks that followed were a slow, exquisite torture. Elena wasted no time reshaping Vanguard and her image. She installed a new head of HR whose first act was to mandate sensitivity training, with a special module on domestic violence that featured anonymized case studies suspiciously similar to their marriage. Marcus was required to attend every session, seated in the front row with a facilitator to call on him for insights from leadership. He smiled through gritted teeth while the room watched him squirm. She restructured his department. 2. The aggressive acquisition strategy he'd championed for years was quietly dismantled. Targets he'd spent months courting were suddenly off-limits, unless they met stringent ethical criteria. Deals he'd nearly closed evaporated overnight, replaced by partnerships with nonprofits and employee-owned cooperatives. Profits dipped in the short term, and the board, once his allies, began to murmur. But Elena's calm presentations, delivered with data read aloud by her assistant in crisp, unflinching detail, always silenced them. She had numbers, vision, and an unassailable majority stake. Marcus tried to fight back in the shadows. He leaked anonymous memos to financial blogs suggesting Elena's reforms were naive, that her blindness made her unfit for the cutthroat realities of the market. The pieces ran for a day or two, then vanished, scrubbed from sites as if they'd never existed. One journalist who'd been particularly vicious received a polite email from Vanguard's legal team hinting at defamation. The story was retracted with a groveling apology. Marcus realized Elena's reach extended far beyond the boardroom. She had cultivated allies in media, law, even cybersecurity firms that monitored online chatter about the company, and by extension, about her, at home, or rather, in the sterile penthouse he'd bought with his mistress. Marcus paced like a caged animal. Claire, the younger woman who'd once adored his power, now eyed him with thinly veiled contempt. His bonuses had shrunk. His stock options were vesting slower under new rules Elena had implemented, and the invitations to exclusive events had dried up. Claire spent more evenings out with friends, coming home with shopping bags he could no longer afford to fund without dipping into savings. "You said you'd handle it," she hissed one night, lipstick smudged from whatever club she'd been at. "You said she was nothing." He had no answer, only rage that had nowhere left to go. Desperation bred recklessness. Marcus began digging deeper into Elena's grandfather's estate. Late nights in his home office, fueled by whiskey and spite, he pored over public records, hired a private investigator, even reached out to distant cousins who might contest a will. He found inconsistencies, small ones, but enough to build a case. A signature that looked slightly off, a notary who'd retired under mysterious circumstances. He funneled money to a discreet law firm specializing in probate challenges, convincing himself that if he could prove undue influence or forgery, the shares would revert to a trust he could negotiate his way into. The firm worked quietly for months. Marcus fed them documents, coached them on angles of attack. He started to feel the old surge of control again, the thrill of the hunt. He even allowed himself to imagine the moment he'd walk into Elena's office. No, his office again, and lay the injunction on her desk. The look on her face. The sweet, sweet reversal. But Elena had never stopped watching. One crisp autumn morning, Marcus arrived at Vanguard to find security waiting at the lobby turnstile. His keycard beep read, "Denied." The guard, a man who'd saluted him for years, now avoided his eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. Orders from the top." Upstairs, his office had already been cleared out. Boxes of his belongings sat in the reception area like discarded relics. HR escorted him to a small conference room where Elena waited alone, her guide dog lying calmly at her feet. She didn't rise when he entered. She didn't need to. "I know about the law firm, Marcus," she said softly, as if discussing the weather. "I know about the investigator tailing my aides. I know about the forged affidavits you tried to plant." Her voice never sharpened. It stayed level, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. "Did you really think I'd leave something that important unprotected?" He tried bluster first. "You can't prove." "I don't need to prove intent for board," she interrupted. "I only need to show misuse of company resources. Those late-night emails from your corporate account, the expense reports for consultants, it's all documented." She tilted her head slightly, listening to his breathing hitch. "But I'm not here to fire you today. That would be too merciful." Instead, she offered him a new role, Vice President of Community Outreach, a freshly created position focused on the charitable initiatives she championed. Half the salary. No staff. An office on the third floor with a view of the parking garage. And, most galling of all, direct reporting to a young director she promoted over him, a woman barely 30 who'd once been his junior analyst. "Take it," Elena said, "or leave with nothing. The non-compete you signed is ironclad. You won't work in this industry again. Not in New York. Not anywhere that matters." Marcus took it. The humiliation was immediate and relentless. Colleagues who'd feared him now pitted him, or worse, ignored him. He spent days organizing volunteer drives and writing grant proposals while Elena's star rose higher. Features in Forbes, keynote speeches at Davos, awards for corporate responsibility. She never mentioned him publicly. Of course. She didn't need to. Everyone knew. But something unexpected began to stir inside Marcus during those long, quiet hours in his diminutive office. At first, it was just exhaustion, the slow erosion of anger when there's no outlet left. Then came fragments of memory. Elena's laugh before the darkness crept in, the way she traced his face with careful fingers after a long day, describing colors she'd never seen but somehow understood. He remembered the night their daughter. He stopped the thought cold. There had never been a daughter. They'd talked about children once, early on, but his career always came first. He started listening to the audio recordings of board meetings he was no longer invited to. Elena's voice confident and clear, outlining strategies that were actually working. Profits were rebounding, employee retention at all-time highs, the stock price climbing steadily. She was better at this than he'd ever been. The realization tasted like ash. One evening, long after the building had emptied, Marcus lingered in the lobby watching the city lights flicker on. He saw Elena emerge in the elevator, her guide dog leading her toward the revolving doors. On impulse, he stepped forward. Elena. She paused. The dog sat. The words tangled. An apology felt too small, justification impossible. I was wrong, he managed finally, about everything. She considered him in silence for a long moment. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Wrong doesn't undo scars, Marcus, she said at last. It doesn't rebuild trust. But perhaps it plants something. She adjusted her grip on the harness. I'm not the woman you left anymore. I don't need your remorse. But if you're capable of growth, if this version of you is real, then prove it. Not to me, to the people you can still help. She walked out into the night, the dog's nails clicking against marble, leaving him standing beneath the cold fluorescent lights. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat at his computer and began drafting a proposal, not for revenge, not for reinstatement, but for a program that would fund vocational training for survivors of domestic abuse, modeled on the resilience courses Elena had quietly sponsored through the company foundation. He poured weeks into it, researching nonprofits, crunching numbers, writing with a sincerity he hadn't felt in years. When he finally presented it to his young director, she read it twice, eyebrows raised, then forwarded it up the chain without comment. Days later, an email appeared in his inbox, a calendar invite from Elena herself. Subject line blank. Location, her office. He arrived early, hands sweating. She was at the window, facing the skyline she couldn't see, but seemed to sense anyway. I read your proposal, she said without turning. It's good. Better than good. A pause. There's a budget line for it next quarter. You'll lead the rollout. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. But understand this, she continued, voice steady. This isn't forgiveness. It's opportunity. For them. For the women still trapped in what I escaped. If you weaponize it, if you relapse into the man you were, I will end you professionally without a second thought. I know, he said quietly. She nodded once, dismissing him. As Marcus left the office, something shifted inside him. Not redemption, not yet, but the first fragile possibility of it. Elena, meanwhile, returned to her desk where a braille transcript of the latest acquisition target waited. She had empires to build, wounds to heal, a world to reshape. And if Marcus could become part of that reshaping, fine. If not, he would simply become another cautionary tale in the training module. Winter settled over Manhattan, snow dusting the high-rise windows. Inside Vanguard, the machinery of change hummed on, driven by a woman who had turned her deepest darkness into blinding light. Marcus worked late into the nights now, not scheming but building. Slowly, carefully, under the watchful gaze of the one person who'd every reason to destroy him and had chosen, for now, not to. Yet even as the months slipped by and the new program took root, offices opening in 3 cities, hundreds of women finding pathways out, tension lingered like static in the air. Old rivals on the board still whispered about Elena's soft approach. Competitors circled, sensing vulnerability in the company's ethical pivot. And deep in the shadows of forgotten servers, lines of code began to stir. Traces of a cyber intrusion too subtle for standard defenses to catch. Elena sensed none of it directly, but her instincts, honed by years of navigating a world that underestimated her, prickled. She tightened security protocols, brought in new experts, and quietly prepared for whatever storm might come. Marcus, buried in outreach reports one stormy February evening, received an encrypted email from an anonymous address. Subject: She's not the only one with secrets. Attached was a single scanned document, an old medical record bearing Elena's name and a diagnosis dated years before their marriage, hinting at something far more complex than congenital blindness. His cursor hovered over the delete button. The old Marcus would have pounced. The man, he would try to become stare at the screen until the letters blurred, then close the laptop without opening the attachment. But the email had already been read, and somewhere in the digital ether, someone was watching to see what he would do next. Spring arrived in Manhattan with a vengeance. Cherry blossoms exploding along the avenues like silent fireworks. But inside Vanguard Enterprises, the air crackled with something far more volatile. The anonymous email Marcus had closed without opening had not been a solitary probe. It was the first ripple in a calculated assault. Over the following weeks, more messages arrived, each one more intimate, more damaging. Medical files alleging Elena's blindness was psychosomatic, not congenital. Whispered recordings of private therapy sessions from years ago, twisted out of context to paint her as unstable. Leaked board minutes doctored suggest she was siphoning funds into shadowy charities. None of it reached the public, not yet, but it circulated in dark corners of finance forums, seeded by bots and burner accounts. Elena felt the pressure mounting like a storm front. Her cybersecurity team traced the attacks to shell companies in Eastern Europe, but every lead dissolved into proxies and dead ends. The board grew restless again, a faction of old guard directors loyal to the aggressive ethos Marcus once embodied, began scheduling private dinners. They spoke of continuity of leadership and optics of vulnerability. Elena heard the rumors through her network, audio memos, whispered conversations captured by loyal aides, and she prepared. Marcus, meanwhile, found himself at a crossroads sharper than any he'd faced. The program he led had expanded to 5 cities, partnered with shelters and vocational schools, changing hundreds of lives. Women who had once hidden bruises now stood in graduation ceremonies, certificates in hand, eyes bright with futures they dared to claim. He attended every event, no longer as a figurehead, but as someone who listened, who arranged funding, who stayed late to help write resumes. The work had carved something new inside him, a quiet steadiness he hadn't known he was capable of. Yet the new emails kept coming, addressed only to him. The sender, calling themselves Veritas, offered proof that Elena had known about the inheritance long before the divorce, that she had played the victim to orchestrate his downfall. They promised documents, witnesses, a narrative that would restore him to power if he cooperated. All he had to do was forward certain internal files, testify to her manipulative patterns, and step forward when the time came. He sat in his small office late one May evening, rain lashing the windows, staring at the latest attachment. This one contained a video, grainy security footage from years earlier, showing Elena navigating their old apartment without her cane, reaching unerringly for a shelf. The implication was devastating, her blindness exaggerated, perhaps even fake for sympathy and advantage. Marcus's hand trembled over the keyboard. The old hunger surged. The corner office, the fear in colleagues' eyes, the life he'd lost. But then he saw the timestamp. The footage was from a night he remembered vividly. The night he'd come home drunk and raging. The night he'd first struck her hard enough to draw blood. In the video, Elena moved without the cane because she had dropped it while trying to shield herself. She found the shelf because she knew every inch of that apartment by heart, had memorized it to avoid his outbursts. The proof was not deception, it was survival. He forwarded the entire thread. Not to the press, not to board, but to Elena's chief security officer, along with a single line. This ends now. What followed was a masterstroke. Elena's team used Marcus's cooperation to plant honey traps. Fake files, misleading trails, that lured the attackers into revealing their true paymaster. It led back to a name no one expected. Reginald Voss, Elena's own cousin, a distant relative who had been quietly contesting the will for years from the sidelines, funding the campaign through layers of offshore accounts. He had waited, patient as a spider, hoping to discredit her before forcing a sale of the company he believed should have been his. The takedown was surgical and public. On the morning of Vanguard's annual shareholder meeting, Elena took the stage in the grand auditorium, her guide dog at her side, the room packed with investors, analysts, and press. She began with gratitude for the company's record profits, for the lives changed through new initiatives. Then, without raising her voice, she revealed the attempted sabotage, naming Reginald and presenting ironclad evidence of his conspiracy. The screens behind her displayed transaction trails, intercepted communications, even the forged medical records. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed, and when the murmurs peaked, Elena did something no one anticipated. She invited Marcus to the stage. He walked up under 1,000 stares, heart pounding, unsure what she intended. She turned toward his footsteps, extending the microphone. "Some of you know parts of our story," she said calmly. "Many of you have heard whispers. Today, I want you to hear truth from someone who once caused me unimaginable pain and who chose, in the end, to stand against further harm." Marcus took the mic. His voice cracked at first, then steadied. He spoke of the man he had been, arrogant, cruel, blinded by ambition in ways deeper than sight. He spoke of the violence he'd inflicted, the abandonment, the years of denial, and he spoke of the slow, painful awakening that came not from punishment alone, but from witnessing resilience he had tried to crush. He detailed his role in uncovering the final threads of the attack, refusing to trade old sins for new power. When he finished, the auditorium was silent enough to hear the hum of the lights. Then applause began, tentative, then swelling into a wave that shook the rafters. Reginald's proxies on the board resigned within hours. Charges were filed. The stock soared on the narrative of integrity, triumphing over corruption. But the real magic happened in the quieter moments afterward. In her office that evening, with the city glittering beyond the windows, Elena and Marcus sat across from each other, not as enemies, not as ex-spouses, but as two people who had walked through fire and emerged transformed. "I don't forgive you," she said softly, not in the way stories demand. "Some wounds stay open, so we never forget. But I respect what you chose today, and I am proud of the man you're becoming and of the woman I became despite you." He nodded, tears he no longer bothered to hide tracing his cheeks. "I will spend the rest of my life earning the space you've given me to do good, not for redemption, for them, for every person still trapped." She smiled then, a radiant, fierce smile that lit the room brighter than any skyline. "Then go do it. The world is wide, Marcus, and it needs both of us, flawed, fierce, and finally free." Years later, Vanguard stood as a beacon in the corporate world, not perfect, but profoundly human. Elena led it with visionary grace, her initiatives touching millions, her story inspiring countless survivors to claim their power. Marcus built the Outreach Foundation into an international force, traveling to speak not his fall, but to climb back toward decency, always crediting the woman whose strength forced him to confront his own. And on quiet evenings, when the city hushed under snow or summer stars, people passing the glowing tower would sometimes pause, sensing something extraordinary within its walls, a tale of cruelty overturned, of justice woven from pain, of two broken souls who, separately and spectacularly, turned darkness into a light brilliant enough to guide the lost home. Because in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't destruction. It was rising so magnificently that the one who tried to bury you is left staring, forever changed, at the unbreakable sky you now command.